more especially in one of the richest regions in this continent, which is DRC. Member states are not paying their annual dues, reflecting the lack of seriousness from ourselves as Africans. As South Africa, we must play a leading role in funding of OAU. Almost 65 years since the formation of the AU, we still find ourselves wanting in as far as building a continent, a coordinated continental economic system that will be in favor of the interest of the African people. On this note, EPAC will continue to call for the unification of the African continent.
Sithokoze mhlonishwa. Olandelayo sobiza umama umhlonishwa Colonial wakati.
House Chair, tomorrow is Africa Day. But what does Africa have to celebrate? Thousands of Africans are dying in the sea in an attempt to seek a better life. Terrorism is rife in our country, and there's no peace on the continent. When the OAU, now referred to as the AU, was established by Muammar Gaddafi in 1963, the purpose was to achieve greater unity and solidarity between African countries and to defend the sovereignty and independence of its member states of 55 countries on the African continent. The question is, have we achieved this? Unfortunately, no. The AU still has to be made fit for purpose because it has failed to deliver on its founding principles and the ideal of African unity anchored in the values of respect, tolerance, and solidarity. President Kagame was tasked in 2017 to prepare a report to accelerate the reform of the AU. Some key findings of this report include chronic failure to see through AU decisions. There are some 1,500 decisions before the Assembly not yet adopted. I hope Honorable Zuma is listening. It is a fragmented organization and there is a lack of accountability for performance. There is an over-dependence on donor funding. 90% of the activities that the AU participates in is dependent on donor funding. Only half of the member states pay their subsidies. The AU is heavily subsidized by South Africa, yet we don't get to see the political rand value. Donors have their own agendas and manipulate outcomes for their own benefit. Reform starts and ends with the leaders of the African continent. Leaders like the President of Burundi, who you've heard many times in this speech before, extended his stay by amending the constitution. Uganda also doing it, and he's even in a compromise said to the MPs, if you amend the constitution to let me stay on until 2034, I'll give you an extra 2 years in your term. So it goes from 5 years to 7 years. Now, these autocrats, despots, dictators are long past their sell-by dates, and the continent remains silent on this. Colleagues, it's a privilege to represent the South African Parliament at the Pan-African Parliament. I've been there since 2009. When I was first elected, little did I know what I was getting into. It has been a rewarding and enjoyable experience. I was honored this year to be elected as the chairperson of the ad hoc committee to oversee the election of the president of PAP, and I've also been elected as the chair of the permanent committee on rules, privileges, and discipline. Pan-African Parliament is an organ of the AU and subject to its rules. Regrettably, the current president ignored one of the core rules, namely the principle of rotation and presented himself as a candidate for a third term. What a poor reflection on both the President and the AU in allowing such a disrespect of the rules. South Africa is the host country of the Pan-African Parliament and has made every effort to meet its commitments. However, we need to tighten the reins and do proper oversight on the Pan-African Parliament and call for a forensic audit into both the staffing and finances of PAP. In 2008, the AU Assembly adopted a protocol to have a single court of justice and human rights. South Africa has neither signed nor ratified this protocol. Yet, we are in such a hurry to exit from the ICC. We don't have any current court to preside over Africa. The ICC is there, but we want to exit, all to save one man, President Bashir. Yesterday, President Ramaphosa, I would draw that. That was a real Freudian slip. Yesterday, President Ramaphosa extolled the potential of Africa and how we should work towards improving the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. How can we? We have not signed nor ratified it. So, you made a great speech, sir, but it's all talk. Start by ratifying it and then we can action on it. The African continent needs to have a serious debate on the impact of Brexit. There will be a loss of at least 50% funding come the 29th of March 2019. Africa has everything needed to succeed. To fail Africa is unforgivable.
Colonial. Uma swaphela ngizokubiza umhlonishwa uMasango azoswaphelisa.
Honorable House Chairperson, honorable members, fellow South Africans, as we pay tribute to the ever-enduring legacy of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, it is instructive to note that when it came to the defense and advancement of the fortunes of the African continent, Mandela shared the same vision with Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Haile Selassie, Jomo Kenyatta, Nnamdi Azikiwe, and he would certainly not be at variance with the prophetic assertion of Robert Sobukwe, who once said, I quote, "The wheel of progress revolves relentlessly, and the nations of the world take their turn at the field glass of human destiny. Africa will not retreat, Africa will not compromise, Africa will not relent, Africa will not equivocate, and she will be heard, remember Africa," unquote. Honourable members, given the previous and current circumstances of the African continent, one cannot but agree with Kwame Nkrumah, who observed that, I quote, "For centuries, Europeans dominated the African continent. The white man arrogated to himself the right to rule and to be obeyed by the non-white. His mission, he claimed, was to civilize Africa. Under this cloak, the Europeans robbed the continent of vast riches and inflicted unimaginable suffering on the African people," unquote. As we remedy this terrible colonial legacy, Africa needs to upscale the intra-African trade, which is still hovering between 12% and less than 20%, which means that Africa is grossly under-trading with itself.
Order, honorable members, lower your voices, please. Thank you.
And yet the inter-European trade is at 60%. Investment in the continent has been at the impressive average of 32% since 2002. It is precisely in view of the aforesaid that industrialization, manufacturing, innovation become urgent imperatives. We must stem the tide of illicit financial flows, tax avoidance and collusion by multinational corporations in the continent, which leaves Africa in its current penurious state. Honorable members, tomorrow on Africa Day, let us hearken to the wise counsel of Professor Patrick Lumumba, who recently delivered a lecture at the Rwanda National Security Symposium and noted that Africa is regarded as a piece of meat in a plate, and the diners are France, the UK, USA, European Union, the Chinese, and the Arabs. Lumumba also describes the description of ourselves as Anglophone, Francophone, and Lusophone. This we must correct. Africa is sitting on vast combined mineral resources and wealth unsurpassed in the world, which is unfortunately exploited to the benefit of other nations because the leadership of the continent countenance it, Professor Lumumba lamented. Another advantage is that Africa is home to the world's largest population of 15 to 24-year-olds, and this is estimated to double by 2045. Cities are expanding, infrastructure growing at an estimated 60%. Communities will be urbanized by 2050. The continental domestic market for finished products such as mobile phones, TVs, cars, clothes, and new homes stands Africa in good stead. The fast-growing middle class has an excellent buying and spending power, and that is why, amongst others, shopping malls are mushrooming. The big question is, honorable members, who is manufacturing and selling these goods to Africa? Who is benefiting from our middle class's buying power and conspicuous consumption? Should Africa continue to be the other nations' market and not challenge their selfish protectionism? Honorable members, we congratulate our imaginative leadership in the continent for unveiling the Continental Industrial Master Plan so that manufacturing, innovation, and scientific research can be uplifted and fast-tracked. Let's welcome the opening of the regional branch of the BRICS Bank in Johannesburg, 2017. The bank will provide non-BRICS member states with infrastructure funds in our continent. As we celebrate Africa Day tomorrow, let us agree with Professor Thandika Mkandawire that the continent needs to train its own professional cadres, what he called the Afrocrats. Last year, I applauded the gathering in Johannesburg of the academics, historians, economists, philosophers, and many others who were going to discuss a contribution to the decolonization or re-Africanization of the re-Africanization of the curriculum so that it can truly reflect the African continent. As we celebrate the legacy of Nelson Mandela, let our universities, political leaders, and writers contribute in the rewriting of our history, films, and newspapers from their Eurocentric orientation. We must combat the intentional vilification and villainization of the liberation struggle heroes of the continent, the intention of which is to deny posterity its inspirational heroes. Same vilification obtains for the liberation movements in Africa. As members would be aware, there has been a deliberate distortive historical revisionism in the settler states such as Canada, Australia, and the USA. This distortive historical revisionism is also being carried out here in Africa, the intention of which is that the colonizers and settlers found vast expanses of land unoccupied by the aboriginals and natives. In the same vein, I wish to take issue with Mr. Kalikril, the enfant terrible, the CEO of AfriForum, who went overseas to launch a vitriolic diatribe against his own country and his own compatriots, Nogal. He claims that the so-called, in quotes, terrorist ANC and EFF are slaughtering whites in their tens of thousands daily, unquote. Absolute hogwash. Recently, in an interview with Radio 702, he then opines against the UN and the world like a lunatic and says that the apartheid system was not a crime against humanity because, according to him, only 600 people died during apartheid. He must visit history records. As usual, the DA has not condemned Mr. Kriel for fanning racist fires in our country as they did with Helen Zille, who tried to sanitize colonialism, slavery, and apartheid. Net gister, achtbare voorzitter, die achtbare lid PJ Groenewald geïmpliceer dat pogings om armoede en gebrek om grond te spreken een aanval op wetmensen is. Bram Fischer, Beers Naude, Stefanie Kemp, Maria Schoon, Betty Tetwey en tale andere Afrikaners, democraten en vrijheidsvechters het verschil. Duizenden trotse Afrikaans sprekende wet-Zuid-Afrikaners verschil ook. Hulle verstaan dat vrijheid ondeelbaar is. Hulle verstaan dat een mens is een mens door andere mensen. Umuntu ngabantu. De vrijheid van zwart mensen is een voorwaarde voor de vrijheid van wit mensen. Daarom kan de vrijheid van zwart mensen nooit een aanval op wit mensen wees nie. En de bevrijding van Palestina is niet een aanval op Israëli's nie. Bram Fischer quoted Paul Kruger in his speech from the dock and said, "With confidence we lay our case before the whole world. Whether we win or die, freedom will rise in Africa like the sun from the morning clouds." Now, a few historical distortions. Honorable Kalian comes here and says Gaddafi founded the Organization of African Union. No, it was not Gaddafi. It was 33 independent states that did that in 1963. And the same noise that the DA is making about good governance, about human rights, about everything else. Human rights, good governance, and democracy, yes, we agree with you. We want you to also challenge Israel in terms of the oppression, the human rights violation that they make in Palestine. And also demand that the three members of the P5, China, Russia, and the USA, particularly the USA, which likes to refer cases to the ICC, must also be members of the ICC so that when the American soldiers violate or accused of war crimes, their soldiers or that country can be referred to the ICC. Otherwise, the ANC agrees with some of the observations made by the other members, and we are happy that we are celebrating Africa Day tomorrow. Thank you, Honorable House Chair.
Sithokoze Pondelibovu Dumako. Bahlonishwa ma-Afrika amahle. Sifike emaphethelweni omsebenzi wethu wanamhlanje. Indlu ingaphakama. Sithokoze.